The name Dante is familiar to every Russian. He is forever remembered as the man who killed the greatest Russian poet. Yet few recall his full name. Even fewer know that he tried to avoid the fatal duel, or how he lived afterward. Many people are also mistaken about the true reasons behind the confrontation. However, all these overlooked facts allow us to re-examine the event at the Black River from a new perspective and reconsider the circumstances of the tragedy. Some historians argue that the letter was not about the poet's wife at all, but rather about Ida Politkovskaya, the daughter of Count Stroganov and a cousin of Natalia Nikolaevna. Under the sun of St. Petersburg society, two dazzling beauties reigned, with Natalia Goncharova considered the undisputed queen. Yet contemporaries noted that Idalia Politkova was no less captivating. If Natalia was the sky, Idalia was the flame. Politkova was a frequent guest in the Pushkin household. Goncharova's sisters adored her for her elegance and charm. Alexander Pushkin himself admired the witty redhead, once joking, "Tell Idalia I shall come for a kiss myself. What, does the postal service not deliver affection?" Idalia was sharp-tongued, intelligent, and cunning. A trail of scandal and intrigue followed her, and whispers claimed she had orchestrated several duels while managing to remain untouched by blame. In high society, she was dubbed Madame Intrigue. Her husband, Colonel Alexander Politkov, commanded the same cavalry guards regiment in which Georges Dantes served. Their marriage was said to be without love. Gossip swirled that one of her suitors had been General Roman Sky, who would later become Natalia Goncharova's second husband. Cynical tongues remarked that the general had finally abandoned politics for poetry, leaving Politkova for the poet's widow. The affair between Idalia and Dantes, if real, might have cost him everything. Not only was her husband his commander, but her father was Count Stroganov, a close confidant of the emperor. Some believe that the liaison was initially secret. Later, suspicion grew. Socialite Alexandra Smirnova-Rosset wrote, "Dantes never loved Natalia. He found her dull and silly. His true passion was Italy." Their meetings at the Goncharova house, she implied, were a cover for his real infatuation. When Dantes awaited trial under arrest, Idalia wrote him, "My poor friend, your imprisonment tears at my heart. I would give anything to come to you. This all feels like a nightmare." She sent him a precious bracelet crafted by French artisans. In a later letter, she confessed again, "If I love anyone, it is with all my heart, forever. Farewell. I say farewell only because I cannot believe we shall never meet again." Dantes' wife, Catherine, also wrote, "She came yesterday only for a moment. She's in despair that she couldn't say goodbye. She wept uncontrollably." Politkova would later meet Dantes several times in France, and they maintained cordial relations. In letters, she insisted he bore no guilt for what happened and placed the blame solely on Pushkin. In St. Petersburg, it was common knowledge that Politkova, once friendly with the poet, had come to despise him and carried that hatred for the rest of her life. A notorious legend claims that over 50 years after Pushkin's death, when a statue was unveiled in Odessa, she came solely to spit on its pedestal. Rumor had it she planned to repeat the gesture when another statue was installed in Moscow. Politkova reportedly called Pushkin a rhymer, not a poet, even at the height of his fame. One version of the story says he mortally offended her during a carriage ride to a ball when they were alone and she attempted to get close, only to be rejected. That insult allegedly ignited her vendetta. Some believe her enmity led her to encourage Dantes' pursuit of Natalia Goncharova, providing cover for their trysts. Dantes' obsession with Natalia Nikolaevna Goncharova reached a scandalous peak when Madame Intrigue, Idalia Politkova, invited the poet's wife to her home, only to leave moments later under some vague pretense. Alone in the drawing room, Natalia found herself face to face with Dantes. He immediately launched into a passionate declaration of love, threatening to shoot himself on the spot if she did not return his feelings. Goncharova was saved by the sudden entrance of a child, followed by the governess. Seizing the moment, she quickly fled the Politkov residence. That same evening, Natalia confided the entire incident to her husband. The public, however, would not learn of the secret meeting until the end of the century, thanks to two sources: a questionable memoir by Natalia's daughter, Natalia Yelanskaya, and a more credible account in the writings of Nadezhda Kvoshchinskaya, writing under the name V. Krestovsky, as recorded by the Baroness Martini. Dianthès was often seen at Politkova's, she wrote, and once he met Natalia there. She returned in haste, indignant, saying she had narrowly escaped his advances. This moment, it seems, was the first spark in the chain of events leading to the infamous duel and death. Georges Dantes was born on February 5, 1812, into a wealthy landowning family in Alsace. During the July Revolution in France in 1830, he remained loyal to King Charles of England and refused to serve the new monarch. As a result, he voluntarily left the elite military school of Saint-Cyr, where he had enrolled only a year earlier. Interestingly, through one of his family lines, Dante was related to the Russian noble families of the Gusevs and the Pushkins. There were no other definitive proofs of Dianthès pursuing Natalia. Even Pushkin himself once wrote in a letter to Colonel Kern, "Your son's behavior has remained within the bounds of social decorum." All the damning evidence against the young baron surfaced only after the duel, as if society had suddenly gained hindsight, recalling prolonged glances, frequent dances, awkward jokes. "At one ball," wrote a witness, "his stares so compromised Madame Pushkina that everyone was appalled." A second motive for the duel was Dianthès' own reluctance to fight. Known for avoiding conflict, he had never participated in a duel. Just one day after the fateful encounter at the Politkovs, Pushkin and several of his friends received an anonymous libelous pamphlet awarding the poet a mock cuckold's diploma. It hinted not only at Dianthès' supposed interest in Natalia, but even at the emperor's. Pushkin believed the anonymous author to be Louis Hecarin, Dianthès' adoptive father, and maintained that belief until his death. Enraged, Pushkin immediately challenged Dianthès to a duel without offering any explanation. According to the unwritten code of honor among Russian officers, one could not refuse a challenge unless one was a woman or a Grand Duke. Refusing was seen as a disgrace not only to oneself but to the military as a whole. Dueling etiquette allowed for various outcomes: reconciliation, warning shots, but Georges Dantes was no duelist. He avoided risk and carefully planned every step of his life. In contrast, Pushkin was famously hot-tempered. He had issued 26 challenges in his lifetime, 21 initiated by him, and while most ended in peace, in none of the duels did he ever injure or kill an opponent. Pushkin's daughter, Countess Natalia Meringberg, later recalled, "My mother always believed that the real cause of the duel was not jealousy, but the avalanche of anonymous letters and slander my father received in late 1836. According to her, the infamous pamphlets were written by Prince Pyotr Dolgorukov, known for his unsavory reputation. A handwriting expert later confirmed this claim. The libels were indeed penned by Dolgorukov. In truth, Baron Hecarin, Dianthès' adoptive father, never wanted the duel to happen. To prevent it, he forced Dianthès to marry Ekaterina Goncharova, Natalia's elder sister. This made Pushkin's rival a future brother-in-law. As a result, the poet was forced to withdraw his first challenge. Yet soon after, Dianthès wrote Pushkin, "You challenged me without giving a reason, and I accepted without hesitation. Honor demanded it." Georges-Charles de Hecarin-Dantes wrote to Pushkin, "At present you assure me that you no longer have grounds to desire a duel. You will be the first to agree that, before taking back our words, each of us must provide an explanation, so that we may later treat each other with respect." On January 10, 1837, Dantes married Ekaterina Nikolaevna Goncharova. Pushkin, still plagued by jokes circulating in society about his family, sent an extremely offensive letter to Senior Hikarin in early February. In it, he insinuated a homosexual relationship between father and son and mentioned George's shameful illness. This letter would later be used in court against the Hikarins. That same day, Baron Hikarin responded that the truce was over. The duel challenge remained, and Dantes was ready to accept it. It was a cunning move, as the person being challenged shoots second, if still alive. Dante came to Russia in search of glory, fortune, and rank. He carried a letter of recommendation from Wilhelm of Prussia, the brother of Empress Alexandra Feodorovna. Her Majesty generously supported the impoverished Asian barons from her own purse and offered him patronage in his service. As a result, in 1834, Dante was appointed as a cornet by imperial decree, practically without exams. 2 years later, he became a lieutenant in one of the most prestigious cavalry regiments, the Cavalier Guards, and even served as a personal guard to Empress Alexandra Feodorovna. On February 8, 1837, during the duel on the Black River, Pushkin was mortally wounded in the abdomen. Such an outcome was unexpected for Dantes. It was his first duel, and for the poet, his fourth. There is evidence that Hikarin, in a rented carriage to avoid recognition, followed the duelists. When he learned of the result half a verst from the site, he gave his carriage to the wounded Pushkin and returned home in a hackney cab. Dantes, now married to Natalia Goncharova's sister, was in what many considered a strange and unbelievable marriage. Society was puzzled. How could this brilliant guardsman, a darling of the court, marry the plain and poor older sister of Pushkin's beautiful wife? Contemporaries claimed that neither George nor Ekaterina was enthusiastic about the marriage. For Dantes, it was a way to avoid the duel. For the 28-year-old Ekaterina, considered an old maid, relatives persuaded her to agree. On the eve of his wedding, George joked about a popular play, The Mad Day or The Marriage of Figaro, turning it into The Mad Autumn or The Marriage of George de Hekarin. Despite this, George and Ekaterina lived in harmony for 7 years, and she gave birth to 4 children, 3 daughters and a son. She died of postpartum fever at 34. The real name of our anti-hero was George Charles Dantes. He received the surname de Hekarin Dantes while in Russia. Louis Jacob Theodor van Hekarin was the Dutch ambassador in St. Petersburg and enjoyed immense influence at the Russian court. He met George by chance when the young man fell ill with pneumonia in the German town of Lübeck. They quickly became close. To formalize the adoption, Hikarin had to obtain permission from George's biological father and the King of the Netherlands. Even Dante himself never understood the sudden paternal affection of the 43-year-old baron. To this day, people wonder, who gives their name and fortune to a stranger in exchange for nothing but companionship? The adoption broke 3 legal rules. George was over 18, had not lived with Hikarin for 6 years, and the baron was under 50. Regardless, Dantes gained a new name, baronial title, and inheritance rights. The name change from Dantes to de Hikarin Dantes provoked ridicule not only in aristocratic salons, but even among soldiers. In his cavalry regiment, it was joked, "What's happened to our lieutenant? He used to be a dentist, Dantes. Now he's a doctor, Hikarin." No one, not in Russia, the Netherlands, or France, understood Hikarin's motives, and no one ever will. Though Dante dreamed of becoming a field marshal, he was extremely undisciplined, receiving 44 reprimands over just 3 years of service. According to his contemporaries, he was as captivated by charming young ladies as he was by his military duties. Exceptionally attractive and charismatic, Dante never lacked admirers. Tall, elegant, cheerful, and witty, he was wildly popular in high society. He possessed a natural ability to charm people. This alone explains why he was welcomed even in the most refined salons, including those of Vyazemsky, Karamzin, and Pushkin himself. A popular version of a homosexual relationship between Hikarin and Dantes circulated widely in high society. Rumors suggested that the relationship within their family was not entirely familial. Pushkin himself actively fueled these rumors. In his diary, he wrote that Dante indulged in sodomitic sin and added, "I was the first to learn of it, and I joyfully made this news public." This version can neither be confirmed nor definitively disproven. Although after the duel, Dante was expelled from Russia, the initial reaction of St. Petersburg's high society, except for a few, was largely supportive of the Hikarins. They were treated with warm sympathy. Even Emperor Nicholas spoke of Dantes graciously, acknowledging that he could not refuse a challenge and had behaved with courage and honor during the duel. Pushkin's funeral turned into a massive, spontaneous demonstration. Foreign ambassadors reported it to their governments, noting that the crowd consisted mostly of the middle class and common people. Under pressure from below, both Nicholas and the aristocracy realized that Pushkin's death was a tremendous national loss. A court was convened to try Hikarin and Dantes. George and his adoptive father attempted to justify the duel by presenting Pushkin's provocative letter and his written challenge. After reading the letter, the court agreed that Dante had engaged in the duel to defend his father's honor. As a result, the Hikarins received a relatively lenient sentence. George was stripped of his military rank and, as a foreign citizen, was exiled. He was placed in an open cart and expelled from Russia like a vagabond, without even notifying his family. The French ambassador expressed outrage at this treatment in his official dispatch. After numerous unsuccessful attempts to justify himself before the emperor, Senior Hikarin took a leave of absence and never returned to Russia. Nevertheless, his close relationship with George continued. George and his wife occasionally traveled to Vienna to visit his adoptive father. In 1875, Hikarin retired and settled in Paris with his adopted son. He died at the age of 93, preserving his lively wit to the end. Curiously, Dantes spoke little of the duel with Pushkin later in life. He considered it just another youthful adventure and believed he had acted as any man of honor should, by answering a public insult. He never expressed regret, stating that he fulfilled a duty and had nothing to reproach himself for. In society, Dante was carried on people's arms and constantly surrounded by admirers. Spoiled by attention, he became overly familiar with women, embracing and kissing them, resting his head on their shoulders. His fellow officers recalled that he approached Russian households as a foreigner would, bolder than the locals, more demanding, and some might say, more insolent than custom allowed. In France, Dantes gained the reputation of a fearless duelist who had shot the great Russian poet. While scandalous by Russian standards, this notoriety gave him a certain distinction at home. In fact, in the National Assembly, where he served, he was often chosen to arbitrate parliamentary duels. After returning to France, Dante's career soared. In 1843, he was elected to the General Council of the Upper Rhine and later became its chairman. He also carried out secret missions abroad for Louis Napoleon. In gratitude, Napoleon, once he became emperor, appointed Dante a lifetime senator. Interestingly, for many years, Georges Dantes acted as an informant for the Russian embassy in Paris. Among the intelligence he provided were reports on Louis Napoleon's plans to declare an empire and information about an assassination plot against Alexander II. By 1881, Dantes had built himself a 3-story mansion near the Champs-Élysées. He lived on the ground floor. The upper floors were reserved for his numerous descendants. According to his grandson, Dante was quite content with his life and often said that it was only thanks to his forced exile from Russia that he owed his brilliant political career. After this unfortunate duel, Dantes faced a bleak future as a regiment commander somewhere in a Russian province with a large family and insufficient means. He died at his family estate, surrounded by children and grandchildren, at the age of 83. Dante's daughter was a fervent admirer of Pushkin. If there was a great fate in this story, it befell George's descendants. His own daughter, Leonie Charlotte, fell in love with Russia and Alexander Pushkin. An intelligent, educated, and remarkably cultured young woman, Leonie was not interested in social life or entertainment. Instead, she was drawn to science and art. She independently completed the entire curriculum of a polytechnic school at home, and according to her professors, she was one of the top students. Her other passion was the Russian language and Russian literature. Although Georges forbade his wife to speak Russian with the children, Leonie specifically learned Russian to read Pushkin in the original. Amazingly, despite living in the French capital, being raised in a French family, speaking French, and following French traditions, she was Russian to the core. According to her own brother, Joseph Chloe, no one told her from childhood who had caused Pushkin's death. Years later, Pushkin avenged Dantes from beyond the grave. Leonie eventually learned who had killed her idol. She discovered this by chance from a Russian newspaper that fell into her hands. First reason, Dante was not in love with Pushkin's wife. She sincerely believed that the duel between Dantes and Pushkin had not been conducted according to the laws of honor. During one family evening, she openly called Georges a murderer. She became obsessed with the tragedy, and her mental health began to deteriorate. Tired of her daughter's attacks, Dante placed Leonie in a mental institution at the age of 18, where she spent 30 years before passing away. It is widely believed that the Frenchman was madly in love with Alexander Sergeyevich's young wife, the beautiful Natalia, and that this supposed affair led to the fatal duel. Yet another theory suggests that the young Georges was merely a pawn in someone else's game, possibly in the hands of his manipulative, evil genius, Ida Grigorievna Politkovskaya. In early 1836, Dante carefully concealed the name of his beloved, trying to protect her reputation. In a letter to his adoptive father, Baron Hecarin, he confessed, "I am madly in love, but I do not name her because the letter may not arrive safely. But think of the most enchanting creature in Petersburg, and you'll know who it is. The worst part is, she loves me too, and we cannot even meet because her husband is terribly jealous." A century later, when the letter was published, it seemed to condemn Natalia Nikolaevna. Proof, some claimed, that Pushkin's wife had fallen in love with her husband's killer. But that January, the imperial balls were full of dazzling women, no less captivating than Natalia, who, heavily pregnant, only attended court receptions twice, in November and December. She was due to give birth to a daughter in late May 1836.